Okay, here we go. Hope everyone can see my screen.
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you for confirming. When working remotely, we're all our own IT specialists. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for the invite, and thank you so much, Juarez, as well. Hello, everyone. My name is Bojan Magusic. I work with Microsoft as a cloud solution architect, focusing on security, compliance, and identity across what we call public cloud platform, what some people might also refer to as Azure. I'm delighted to be joined virtually this evening and to be invited to this very, very important conversation that you're having around security. And I'm even more delighted to give you a glimpse into what's called Azure Sentinel and also to share with you how we at Microsoft think about security and how our views have evolved over the years, especially influenced by the recent trends that we're seeing in the market. But before we jump in, I thought it might be wise to get a sense and a flavor from the audience as to how much they're familiar with this topic. So why don't we start off with a few mentee questions? Super, super interesting. So I'll give it just a couple more seconds so we get even more people's input. Then we also see a lot of logs, log correlation, logging, correct, expensive. That's something very, very interesting. We can also touch a bit upon that as well. I do believe we almost have everyone. So with that, and love this workload. So with that, let's go over to our second question. And the second question is, what do you believe is the biggest challenge in cybersecurity today? And we have three options. One is rising number of cyber attacks. Second is security skills in short supply. And the last is too many disconnected products. So out of these three, what do you believe is the biggest challenge in cybersecurity today? So we have two front runners, too many disconnected products, and security skills in short supply. Interesting. Do we have a tie, so it's security skills in short supply with too many disconnected products. We also have rising number of cyber attacks as well. So let's give it a couple more seconds to see. Now we have 432, so too many disconnected products in the lead. Okay, so we are back to a tie. Do we have a tiebreaker maybe? Let's go to mentee.com and use this code to get going. So I believe we had 12 in the previous responses in the previous questions. So I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds if we have more people that want to contribute and to make sure we also get their input. So it seems like security skills in short supply managed to top too many disconnected products. And not far behind, we also have rising number of cyber attacks. Super, super interesting. I personally believe that security skills in short supply is the biggest challenge we have in the industry today, but the others are also challenges that we're seeing. So none of these are less correct or more correct. It just goes to show that there are a lot of challenges that we are facing, especially in this kind of climate. So with that, let me then switch back to our presentation for today. Okay, hopefully everyone can now see the presentation.
Yes.
Thank you for confirming, Nicholas. So thank you for the answers. So the topic of my presentation today is really all about managing and deploying Azure Sentinel as code. We don't operate in a vacuum, that's for sure. And the current pandemic has really created a very, very unique climate for most organizations. So what I've thought I'd do is spend just a little bit time of talking about how SOC teams operate. So how do people in the security operations center usually operate? And there I want to touch on the traditional challenges and how that is applicable around what we're going to be talking today, which is the cloud native SIEM solution. I also want to touch on how public cloud in general, not just for Microsoft, but in general, can help us manage these challenges and the impact of it to the success of SOC teams. Then I would also like to touch briefly on what is a cloud native SIEM. As you might appreciate, it's a fairly recent solution and quite different from traditional SIEM tools in this space. I also want to give you a glimpse into a next generation cloud native SIEM that is Azure Sentinel, and then talk about how to manage it using infrastructure as a code. And with that, I want to end on a high note with Q&A. So we will have time for questions. Feel free to also, throughout the presentation, leverage the chat window. I'll make sure we come back to all the questions that you raised towards the end. I'll make sure we answer them. So that's our agenda for today. And what I thought I'd start with is this notion of that we're seeing that's called the expanding digital estate, just to give you a sense of where we're headed. And for us, it's really about acknowledging the challenges that organizations are facing nowadays. And what I mean by it is that businesses and even government entities are producing terabytes and terabytes of security relevant log data every day, and that volume continues to increase. We also saw a lot of logging, and the logs being one of the words that comes to mind in the Menti questions when we think of SIEM solutions. And this growth in data is driven both by the digitization or digitalization of business processes, but also explosion in the number of devices that are being used nowadays in companies, which interestingly makes security at its core a big data problem. And organizations are faced with this incredibly difficult task of trying to protect this ever expanding digital estate from the ever growing cyber threats and cyber attacks. And more closely, this then ties to the mission of protecting organizations' information, assets, and that mission is becoming increasingly difficult. And what we're seeing is that the attackers' techniques, the frequency of the attacks, and their complexity are evolving very, very fast. And it's up to the security teams or the SOC teams that are then charged with making sense of all of this data and spotting signs of attack early on so they can respond appropriately. And I believe these teams, from what I hear from partners and customers I work with, they face a plethora of challenges. The three main ones that I hear is that threats continue to grow both in complexity and volume. So attacks are becoming increasingly what we are referring to as heterogeneous, meaning a typical attack might span different parts of a company. So it might start maybe from an IoT device. It might then proceed to an endpoint, spread to a cloud service, and or to a database. And it can even involve multiple identities or user accounts in the process. The second biggest challenge I hear is that relates to alert fatigue. So people in Security Operations Center, people in SOCs, they see too many alerts from disconnected products. So when we look at the typical organization, they tend to have dozens of different security products, each producing a very, very large volume of alerts. And in isolation, these products often have something that's called a very high false positive. They also have, from what I'm hearing, poor response prioritization, which all results in too many alerts to be taken care of. So that means these more traditional systems in the current environment that we are living function, from what I hear, as aggregators of that noise, meaning they don't necessarily increase the response capabilities of the people in a SOC, which is yeah, one of the challenges we also want to solve. The third biggest challenge I hear is there is a global shortage of security professionals in this area. So depending on which maybe survey or research you follow, the one I ground myself in is by the CSO magazine that showed that just in this year, so by 2021, there will be a global talent shortage of 3.5 million security jobs that will be left unfilled, which was also one of our mentee questions. So these are the three main challenges I hear from customers and partners I work with, that threats continue to evolve both in complexity and in frequency, that the people working in security operations center are drowning in alerts from too many disconnected products, and that there is a huge shortage of security professionals in this area. So the question becomes is how can we tackle these challenges? And one thing I believe can help us is the power of the cloud. And the idea behind it is that the cloud can help us manage that complexity of that ever expanding digital estate. So companies or organizations producing more and more data. I believe the cloud can help us manage that complexity by simplifying and making security easier to manage. And in turn, I believe by harnessing the power of the cloud, SOC teams can also maximize their own efficiency by freeing themselves not only from IT related work, but also supercharging their work by leveraging the next generation of AI and ML in the cloud. As you might appreciate, when we are using the public cloud, we can leverage that large scale intelligence available and make it work for us. That's why I say supercharged security relevant work. And those are the reasons why also Microsoft, as a company in this space, has decided to reimagine the whole SIEM tool and SIEM experience to leverage cloud native capabilities. And that solution is called Azure Sentinel. So one important factoid you should be aware of that Azure Sentinel is the first SIEM solution built into a major public cloud platform, which provides then that intelligent security analytics at scale. And it makes it relevant for companies, big and small, because it makes it easy to collect a log and relevant security data across the entire organization, which might range from users, applications, devices, servers, databases, and it might even include third-party cloud. And it also leverages the power of artificial intelligence to ensure you are identifying real threats quickly. And one important advantage being built on top of Microsoft's public cloud platform, which is Azure, it also offers a limitless cloud scale and speed by automatically scaling and again making it suitable for companies regardless of their size, so big and small. So you might be also asking yourself is, since Microsoft isn't typically perceived still by a lot of companies as a security vendor, so what gives Microsoft even the authority to then actually have solutions in this space? Three things I would like to share with you that I ground myself in. The first one would be the more than 1 billion US dollars annually that Microsoft invests only in research development in cybersecurity. The second is also more than the 3,500 dedicated cybersecurity professionals that it has across the different areas, be it the Cyber Defense Operations Center, known as CDOC, being the Digital Crimes Unit, being Mystic, the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, and so on. And what we also see nowadays is it comes down to the signals. And here Microsoft also has trillions of signals that provided an unrivaled insight and intelligence that some might even refer to as cyber threat intelligence. And when we think of Azure Sentinel as an implementation of this cloud native SIEM, I want to share a couple of key takeaways with you. So Azure Sentinel has been purposely engineered to address the SOC challenges we identified earlier. So the rise in sophistication, a number of alerts, helping security professionals supercharge their work by freeing themselves of IT admin work, and also to help fulfill by supercharging their work that talent shortage. One thing that Sentinel also leverages by being built on top of Azure, it automatically scales to meet the data collection and storage requirements of any organization. And since it is part of Azure, it does come as part of, or I should better say, you can access it through the portal, providing both dashboards and user interfaces that are intuitive to people working in a SOC and in the cybersecurity industry. And it also helps streamline typical operations that you would find within a SOC. One thing I would also like to touch upon is the more traditional SIEMs. And when we think of traditional SIEMs, they really started as on-premises solutions comprised of hardware and software that supported log ingestion and storage. But in the case of an incident, both log ingestion and storage requirements might increase dramatically. So companies needed to then buy even larger hardware or even distribute the work across multiple servers to support that kind of a scenario. And what we've seen in even several recent years is that many vendors have even pivoted to install that solutions and that software in an infrastructure as a service model. However, we believe that these SIEMs that are built on top of a public cloud provider's infrastructure, they don't offer really that cloud native capability of automatically scaling and other cloud native capabilities that Sentinel offers. And this has all made the traditional SIEM tool quite expensive to operate from what I hear, even requiring upfront commitment and even incurring very, very high cost, not just for the infrastructure maintenance, but also for data ingestion, which we covered might even increase in the case of a cyber incident. With Azure Sentinel, what customers and partners I work with appreciate it that doesn't come with any upfront cost. So you pay as you use it, providing a true SaaS service and a cost-effective SIEM solution. And we do have also many cases where you would like to maybe combine the security data with information from your either infrastructure environment or even third party to get a end-to-end visibility and understanding of an attack. And this real ease of integration with telemetry sources and other data sources, it's key to every SIEM success, not just Sentinel. And what I often hear from security operations team is that they spend too much effort on connecting data sources and maintaining event flows, which in turn reduces the time they spend delivering security value. And I believe this to be another reason as why we should be looking to leverage the cloud to offer a straightforward way of connecting to data sources, to offer something as a software as a service connection. So ideally, this should be done by abstracting servers and networks and by offering these service-based connectors. And for example, with just a few clicks in Azure Sentinel, you can connect it to the most commonly used services, which might not just include Microsoft, but also third party. And by connecting data sources this way, we also don't need to worry about connectivity health or even event spikes, because again, we're leveraging those cloud native capabilities of a public cloud platform, which then facilitates elasticity, and also we're leveraging the scale of the cloud. And this also allows us to integrate directly with the cyber threat intelligence sources, such as that we already covered is the Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph, which helps increase the likelihood that we're detecting advanced threats by leveraging Microsoft and its partners' insights. And I believe most people who are joining us today would agree that communities make more possible, which is why we should always look at the community-based approach where people can share best practices and even enhance detections, rules, and maybe even machine learning models. Um, Another thing I would just like to touch upon briefly with regards to machine learning in AI is we need to make sure that we empower companies to build out their next generation SOC capability. We need to make sure we empower companies to use machine learning even if they don't have data scientists working for them. That's why in Sentinel, Microsoft also included advanced anomaly detection using machine learning algorithms that can be executed by the SOC team personnel and even the IT managers. Some of them, and we can even show it later on, are as simple as just copy pasting and inserting it and letting that machine learning algorithm run across the data that we have connected and provide us with insights. So we also touched upon that security analysts face a huge burden of triaging and not only sifting through a sea of alerts, but also then correlating those alerts from different products, either manually or using something that's referred to as a traditional correlation engine. Um, for those reasons, we need scalable machine learning algorithms that can do that work for us automatically, so that can correlate a large number of low fidelity alerts to few high fidelity incidences. So making sure that the SOC analysts and the personnel working in the SOC are not drowning in alerts. That's why we want to pivot from these low fidelity alerts to these few high fidelity security incidences. And machine learning technologies can help us here to get value out of a very large amount of security data that we might need to ingest, and it can also help us connect the dots for us. In one example that I've seen is the overall reduction of up to 90% in alert fatigue, which is a very, very impressive number. And I would also like to touch upon the investigation itself. So with regards to investigating an incident, what we see in, for example, Azure Sentinel is that an incident can include one or multiple alerts. And an incident contains a combination of the relevant evidence that can be used for further investigation. What you're seeing on the slide here is a graphical and AI-based investigation that also helps reduce time and helps us even understand the full scope of an attack. And that's something we can also then cover as we are going to show Sentinel. It can also be used to visualize the unfolding of a cyber attack, and it even facilitates to take quick actions inside of the same dashboard. And while we know that detecting threats is half the battle, security teams are still struggling, from what I hear, to follow up on the volume of alerts. So this sheer volume of alerts is such that available personnel are simply overwhelmed, which all too often then results in situations where many alerts simply cannot be attended to. And this leaves the organization vulnerable to attacks that go unnoticed. So many, if not most, of these alerts conform to a recurring pattern that can be addressed by specific and defined course of action, which can then be automated to allow the security operations center to focus on what matters most. And that's providing that true security value to the organization. So we do have also a capability that allows us to run and build orchestration workflows that leverage that recurring patterns. I've thought I offer you a glimpse into, I know this has been a lot of slides and me talking, but before we go into manage, how can we manage this and deploy it using infrastructure as a code, I also thought I offer you a glimpse of how a next generation cloud native SIEM looks like. So let me switch gears and go to a demo environment to show you Azure Sentinel, which is Microsoft's implementation of a next generation cloud native SIEM. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Should be on dashboard overview.
Yes.
Thank you for confirming. Um, Again, what I thought I'd offer you here is a glimpse into a cloud-native SIEM solution. Now, these solutions in a more traditional SIEM world would have been very, very expensive to operate, but here it's part of the Azure portal. So anyone can go to the Azure portal, type in Sentinel, and after creating the relevant components, can see something similar here. So what we are seeing now is the bird's eye overview perspective of Sentinel. So this is the overview page where we can see for the specified time period, which we can then extend, how many events were collected, how many alerts were also detected, and how many incidences. We even have here color coded what was the trend compared to the previous time period. So in the last day, I see more events have been collected, more alerts have been noticed, but we have fewer incidences. I can also then, as a SOC analyst, determine color-coded what are the different alerts and events over time. I can also, if I may be managing or a SOC environment, or if I'm providing it for customers, I can also see here suspicious network traffic on a map. But what I thought I'd also offer is an overview how maybe you could get starting with Sentinel should you choose to. So let me switch gears and go to the data connectors, which again, telemetry is key to any SIEM success. So at the data connectors part of the blade, I have here an overview of those service-based connectors. Again, opposite to now as a SOC analyst worrying about how do I connect to data sources because most of them are third party. How do I make sure I maintain event flows? I can leverage cloud native capabilities, meaning in the data connectors overview, I have these service-based connectors. As we can see, a lot of them are here, and this list keeps on growing with regards to connectors. So I can also notice not only first-party Microsoft connectors, but also third parties such as Barracuda, Checkpoints, Cisco, Citrix, and even support for on-premises data through either Ceph or Syslog connectors. So let's imagine I was interested in one of these connectors. So maybe if I take AWS, for example, because it's not a Microsoft service. So similarly for other services, I can open here the connectors page. So let me go ahead and open it. When I open a connectors page, I see what are the necessary prerequisites tailored for each specific connector and how do I set it up. I also see the configuration steps, a short guide that I can follow to make sure that this is set up in a proper way. So I do have Azure Mask as a plugin here, which is why it's obfuscating the sensitive information shown here. But I can also then, once I've configured this, in just a couple of clicks, I can also then go to the next step. So I already have recommendations. What visualizations can I use? What queries can I leverage here? So if I actually copy one of these queries, once I have the connectors and the data sources I identified connected, I'm also going to see their status here change to green. So let me go ahead then to logs, and I can even leverage. So logs we can see as the container where all of that data is going to be saved. It runs on a service called Azure Monitor Log Analytics. So this is a log analytics workspace that functions as a container where all of that data is going to reside that we connected through data connectors. So I did copy here a query. So I could then, for each connector, I could then just simply put in a query based on KQL, custom query language, which is super easy to understand and learn. And I can even then make sure that the data is actually coming through the connectors. So once I've, again, connected the data sources, went to logs, I can quickly then confirm that data is actually coming. I can even confirm it with a first-party Microsoft source, which is Azure Activity, just as an example. So let me quickly run that one. I see data is flowing. Great. Now you might be asking yourself, well, what's the next step here? I identified the data that I want to bring into this cloud native SIEM solution. We also shown it's possible with just a couple of clicks. We don't need to buy very, very expensive hardware for it. So it does provide us that true SaaS experience. We even went to the logs. We verified that data is actually coming into this container for all of that data. So what could be the next step? One thing I would also like to share with you is the ability for each connector that we saw also to each connector comes with predefined logic that we can create out of the box. However, it's also possible if I go to analytics, this would be the part where I would, as a SOC analyst, really go in and implement the SIEM logic that I would like to see in Azure Sentinel. So every organization has its use cases. When there is a use case for a SIEM, we can then map those use cases back to analytics rules. I can even see here what rules I currently have that are active. I can even leverage templates. So we see a large number of templates who are already available for not only Microsoft solutions, but that can also be scheduled rules. So if I go ahead, I can and select one. I have here a brief description, which is super interesting, taking into consideration the recent SolarWinds supply chain attack. I even see if I already have those data sources connected that are relevant for it, mapped to the MITRE tactic attack framework, which tactics are here, and I even see here already the query is predefined for me. But that's something I can also do custom if I go here and create a scheduled query rule. So here is the place where I can really go in, where using KQL, which was the same language we saw in the log section, I can then define my SIEM logic here. I can define the frequency. I can even define the automation capability. Now you might be asking yourself, well, once we've defined this, what's the next step? So as a SOC analyst, let me switch to incidences. And when we discussed about leveraging not only the public cloud, but also the large-scale machine learning algorithms, we also touched base on how can we go from a large number of low fidelity alerts to few high rich in context incidences. So a question I got asked a lot, so what's then the difference between an alert and an incident? And it's a great question. So as a SOC analyst, I would probably then go here to see what are the active incidences that are since the last time I logged in. So if I go to severity, I can even filter based on the severity. So let me then focus on high as the ones I want to tackle first. What I see here is that each incident acts as a logical container of sorts of alerts, of entities, of artifacts, of everything that presents a potential attack. So let me select one to go a little bit deeper into. So if I see this one, credential access incident on one endpoint. Now as a SOC analyst, I might even go here and assign this to me or to another colleague. I might even change the severity based on my findings. What I also see here is a quick snapshot of which entities were affected and other information. What I would like to leverage now here is that AI investigation, which is what we see now. And I even have, as in a public cloud, we constantly have new features added. So I even get a tooltip if something is new. Now, this is that AI-powered investigation where Sentinel, once I've already identified the data sources, it's not only going to put it in a workspace, so in a container for that data. What Sentinel is also going to do is, once I've identified the analytics rules, so what's my logic, what would I like to detect, it can then create this kind of an incident for us. And when it creates it, when it ingests data, it will also have a graph database of its own that's going to help it then make and provide these mappings. And I can interact with each one of these then entities. I even have, since this might be at first a little bit daunting to understand what happened here, I can even leverage the timeline to understand what happened step by step. What's also super interesting is if I want to maybe zoom in, I can interact with each one of these entities. I might even, so if I focus on an endpoint here, I can even see queries that I can, maybe I'll just minimize this one. So we see it here. And I even can see queries that I can execute in real time and investigate it even further. So I can interact with these entities. I even have here an overview of which entities were infected, processes, endpoints, tools, IP addresses, and even providing me with insights. So as a SOC analyst, I can here get true visibility of an end-to-end potential attack. Now, I can always then go and define new analytics. I can also proactively go to hunting and leverage again that same language, KQL, to proactively hunt for threats. So this would be for organizations who are more mature, who understand it's not only about detecting threats, but also proactively hunting for them, which also matters. So I can leverage the same KQL language here to then proactively have queries that help me understand across the data sources that I have connected of potential threats. Now, a couple of other things that I would like to highlight here is, and one is super, super important when we think of what was mentioned around that detecting threats is only half the battle. The other half is also then responding to them. And by responding, we can then leverage this automation capability, which runs on what's called Azure Logic Apps. So based on a specific rule set, we can then also combine it with a specific action, something maybe that corresponds to a pattern. So these ones can be created using logic apps, even a graphical wizard, which is more or less a drag and drop. If I maybe select one, just to help us understand, so I can even then assign them to specific rules here. So I can not only define rules, I can also define what happens when something is detected and combine it with a specific rule. Another thing I would like to highlight here is for each data source, I can also have a custom visualization. So if I click over to workbooks and if I maybe select, now depending on my user having the right level of privileges, so let me go ahead and tentatively try to open this one just to show how it looks like. So here I can even then have a visualization of the number of relevant sign-ins. So this is obviously going to vary per data source, but I don't need to actually do this custom if I don't want to. I can already leverage a lot of them out of the box that I've connected. Another thing that I mentioned was also that the public cloud can help us leverage machine learning. And when I go to notebooks, if some of you have maybe been already familiar with Azure Notebooks, I can leverage them across the data that I brought into Sentinel. And I even have it here grouped in categories. So the getting started ones of notebooks that I can use for hunting for threats, notebooks I can use for investigating threats, and more for get started. So these ones I can also click, I can determine if I have the relevant data sources, and I can even then go and leverage Azure ML notebooks and really get the insights provided here, ML notebooks provided by Microsoft's when we covered the more than 4,500 dedicated cybersecurity professionals. So these are provided to everyone using Azure Sentinel. So I don't need to necessarily be a data scientist to leverage ML in Azure Sentinel. So Microsoft already provides a lot, and through the community, there's also others that are being contributed. So I can already then build upon the success of what others, leverage their work, and run these ML algorithms across the various data sources that I have brought into Sentinel. So that's that. Just want to provide you a very, very brief glimpse into how does a truly SaaS and a next generation cloud native SIEM look like, and hope that was useful. So let me then go ahead and switch back to the slides, because there I would like to then how this can all be automated. So when we think of automating Sentinel, it is a service in Azure. So when we think of how can we automate the different components of it that we saw, the data connectors, the analytic rules, maybe even the incidences, the notebooks, we see there are different components that when we think of automating, we need to take into consideration. The idea behind managing Azure Sentinel as code is putting it under a source control of your choice. So this could be either Git, SPN. I personally leverage GitHub. And the idea behind it is using a source control so you can track changes to your infrastructure, leveraging infrastructure as a code. And then leverage a DevOps tooling, in my case that's Azure DevOps, to test and deploy that infrastructure into your environment, which some people might refer to as CI/CD. And they're even different than options if you would like to, that you can leverage to automate components in Sentinel. So here I provided a snippet of a table put together by two of my amazing colleagues, Javier and Philippe, who went into the added trouble of actually explaining for each one of these and provided examples. So I will be sharing the deck with Nicolas, and happy for the deck to be shared with the team as well. And on this source, you can then find examples for each one of these methods. So if I look, for example, the data connectors, those can be automated via API. The playbooks or the automation capability, as it's called nowadays, can be also automated through Azure Resource Manager templates. So these are really powerful examples that anyone can then leverage to truly then start to manage Azure Sentinel, which is a SIEM solution, while leveraging infrastructure as a code. One thing I also get asked a lot is how can we then structure our Sentinel code repository? Again, provided by Javier and Philippe. They put together an example here. I personally leverage GitHub, but again, you can leverage the source control version of your choice. So you would have a root folder, and then an option would be for each one of these components to have a subfolder. And then you would have the definition file inside of the specific subfolder. So I also wanted to include this here. One thing I also wanted to provide in the spirit of being helpful is if you were looking to maybe already today or tomorrow to start building Sentinel as a code in a DevOps tooling of your choice. So what I put together is for Azure DevOps, what would be the required steps as identified by Javier to actually provide you with that building your Sentinel as a code experience. So you would then follow these steps. And if you want to learn more, I highly encourage this article by these two colleagues because they also gave very detailed explanations and examples. And even I believe a couple of them have screenshots on what you need to do and how does it look like, just to make sure that you're on track. So in its essence, it starts with creating a DevOps organizations inside of which you have a project. Then inside of that project, you have a service connection to your Azure environment, or it can be even several environments. Then you leverage it to create variables and connect your existing code repository. So in my case, it's GitHub. In your case, it might be something else with your DevOps project. And then it goes into pipelines. And pipelines is something that's super interesting when we think of how can we then create it not only in one, but also in other environments, maybe even orchestration. So if I would like, for example, to first create a connector and then to create, let's say, analytics or once the connector has been created. So super powerful. With that, this concludes my prepared remarks for today, and I also wanted to make sure that we also have time for Q&A. So with that, thank you for having me on. Thank you for listening. I'll just make sure I switch over to the conferencing tool to see if we have any questions. Also, feel free to come off mute. I know it's been a lot of content in a short period of time. Hopefully everyone is still awake, and obviously happy to take any questions you might have if, and I do see. So what is cloud native was the first question. Okay, let me then go ahead and try to tackle one question after another. And all of them are super interesting. I can already tell. So by cloud native, I'm referring to that a solution that's leveraging the native capabilities of the public cloud platform. Let me give an example. So if I was to go, for example, and use the traditional SIEM solution, what we were talking about here, I can obviously go ahead in any public cloud provider's service, use maybe allocate a virtual machine and install software on it. And while that software is running on a VM, so on a public cloud platform of any provider, it can't actually automatically scale. It can't also leverage elasticity. So it's lacking those capabilities that are native to the platform itself, which is why we're looking towards having a solution in this case that's not just bolted on a VM, but it's really integrated and a product that's part of the public cloud platform itself, so that it can then leverage those. When I say cloud native capabilities, predominantly it can automatically scale. It also has that elasticity, so we don't need to worry about even event flows or event or spike in data. Hope that answers the question and provides more clarity.
Thanks.
So next question, I'll try to go one by one. So what are, in your opinion, the most important security events to monitor? Do you have some kind of checklist for client server infrastructure components, etc.? Yes, thank you so much for mentioning that. Super interesting point. We all know what is the data that should be brought into a SIEM to get the most value out of a SIEM. So Mark Simons and Sarah Young, two amazing colleagues from my Juarez side in Microsoft, they put together what was then referred to as the security compass and what I believe nowadays is called as the Azure Security Best Practice, in which they also shared what are the data sources that should be brought into a SIEM to provide an organization the most value out of that SIEM. So they touched on identity, should be the data brought in, operational data. So if someone is using maybe AWS or Azure, so it would be then Azure activity or other cloud operational data. We would be looking to bring the layer 3, layer 4 data, so firewalls, next generation firewalls, also the endpoint and server data, super important. So those would be the main data sources if I didn't leave an important one outside. But we do actually have that list, and it goes back to what we in the industry see as the information that should be brought into a SIEM. So it's endpoint and server data, it's a layer 3, a layer 4, it's identity data, and it's operational data, which with regards to Azure is considered Azure activity data. In AWS's cases or Google GCP, it might be what's considered operational data from their side. So those would be some of the main and most important events worth considering to monitor. Great questions, by the way. How much work do you have to invest in order to define, create dedicated use cases for your own company or application? How many use cases are shipped out of the box, and how much do you typically have to create by yourself? Example for a house-developed application. Okay, another great question. So the idea behind it is partners and customers I work with want to have as much as possible available out of the box, which is why if you may have maybe noticed that when we went to the data connectors, each one of the data connectors and even the new data connectors that are being made available, they typically come with more than just one analytic rule, which is the use cases or the SIEM logic. So most of them already have templates that can be leveraged and that can be created with just one click that says create rule, or it can be done out of the box. So it's a very low investment with regards to time, because a typical organization will first identify the data sources that they want to bring in. They would then bring the data in. If the connectors are already available, they would leverage those, and they would leverage the templates that come with those connectors. For the ones that are not covered by it, that is also possible. So it can be either brought in from on-premises, or it can be brought in, for example, through a Azure function. But I see also companies that pursue that as not having a lot of investment in regards to time, because it still uses KQL as the language. So it's still the same language that they use inside of Sentinel as well. So it's just a matter of defining the use case and then putting KQL once they've brought data inside of it. So it's a two-pronged approach. One would be first determine how the data will be brought into Sentinel or Log Analytics as the workspace if they don't have it as a connector, and they can even use the syslog, Ceph collector. They can even use um, Azure functions, and they can even use the HTTP API for Azure Monitor. So all of those are supported. And I see the second part of it being once they then brought the data, just using KQL to define it. So to answer the second part of your question, most of them are provided out of the box, very little, such as, for example, for an in-house developed application that Microsoft isn't aware of. For those ones, you would actually do typically need to create it, but again, you leverage KQL and it's a click-through wizard. So most time would go towards really defining the SIEM logic with KQL, which doesn't take that long. Thank you for the questions, and feel free to keep them coming. I'm going to go with the next one. Does Sentinel leverage Windows Defender? Thank you for that. So Windows Defender was a product that got renamed a couple of times. If I'm not mistaken, Windows Defender currently is the AV engine. So Sentinel provides a connector to a service called Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is not an antivirus solution, but it is a EDR and EPP, an endpoint detection and response, and an enterprise platform protection solution. So it leverages that one. It does not leverage Windows Defender. However, Windows Defender leverages cyber threat intelligence from Microsoft. So the cyber threat intelligence feed that comes in the form of the Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph, and Sentinel can leverage that as well. Can I do automation? An example, given automatically quarantine a client that acts suspiciously. Yes, that can be done either through the automation done through logic apps, or it can also be done through APIs if it's a use case that's supported through APIs, or even through Azure functions if that's supported. So again, the automation is a super important one because it goes back to how do we make sure that once I've detected something, such as, for example, um, let me then give a client that acts suspiciously. How can I then automatically do a specific action? And I can then leverage the automation inside of Sentinel, which is built on Azure Logic Apps, to define a workflow or a pattern. And with that pattern, I can then tie it to the specific analytic rule, meaning the SIEM logic, or I can have it available as part of my investigation. When I go into the incidences, I can actually run it on demand there as well. So those are the two options, and yeah, it's supported. Thank you so much for the interesting questions. Do we have maybe more questions? Happy to give it more minutes. I know I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I'm happy to stay longer if someone has more questions. We do actually have more questions. Amazing. So do you have some 4 eyes principle rules? Example given that privacy sensitive information, example given network connections of a specific client is only revealed if 2 persons work together. Okay, and we have a second question. If I remember correctly, one of your slides read, bring your Office 365 data for free. Are there any special, apologies, long day, licensing requirements, E5? Are there any calls for queries? Okay, let's answer both of them, and feel free to put in more questions. I can even stay a little bit longer to answer them. Azure Sentinel is part of Azure. So all services part of Azure adhere to the same privacy principle by Microsoft. You might hear that people at Microsoft tend to refer Microsoft runs on trust. We understand trust takes a long time to build, and it can be very, very easily destroyed if we don't make sure that not only information of customers is secure, but also that we are transparent on the way that we handle that information, which is referred to as privacy by some people. One thing I would like to highlight for privacy, we actually have a officially public-facing portal where we also have detailed documents, information, how we handle specific data. So there, for this specific example, I would just refer to the privacy portal because it has even more information, not just about this case, but about in general, how does Microsoft handle data? How does Microsoft then handle sensitive and customer data, especially one that's PII? So yeah, that will be all made available at that portal. With regards to bringing Office 365 data for free, so Azure, super important point as well. So Azure Sentinel, okay, if you allow me maybe to approach it from a different angle. So let's say if I was an organization who already had, for example, invested a lot in Microsoft security products, and if I was looking into Azure Sentinel as that cloud native SIEM, what would be super disappointing for me as that organization if I needed to pay twice for it? Because I already invested in Microsoft solutions, now I need to also pay for Sentinel if I want to bring that information into it, which is why there are also data sources that can be ingested at no additional cost into Sentinel. Office 365 data is one of them. There are other alerts, most of them namely from the Microsoft 365 Defender, that can be ingested at no additional cost into Sentinel. And there are no additional costs for queries. So the idea behind it is to provide organizations who already have invested heavily in Microsoft security solutions and enterprise-grade next-generation cloud-native SIEM for those solutions. So that's why there are specific data sources that can be ingested at no additional cost into both Azure Monitor Log Analytics, which we can maybe see as the container for that data, and Azure Sentinel as the SIEM service. So there are no special licensing requirement. It goes back to the actual data sources that can be ingested at no additional cost, and that can be found on the Azure Sentinel official site. You just need to scroll down to pricing, click the link, and it's going to bring you to a new page where towards the bottom you will actually see a list of the connectors that you can actually bring the data into Sentinel for no additional cost whatsoever. It's been a pleasure to talk to you a little and join this conversation that you're having around security. And yeah, Nicholas, over to you.